Hi, this is Mark Byerly of JazzStage Productions, and you're listening to Detroit Jazz Stage. This month's show is dedicated to the memory of my friend, the late great Latin jazz pianist Hilton Ruiz.
Hello, and welcome to Detroit Jazz Stage. I'm Rodney Reeves.
And I'm Jim Gallert. This month on Detroit Jazz Stage, we feature saxophonist Paul Vornhagen. Since 2003, Vornhagen and co-leader Alberto Nacif have led Tumbao Bravo, a Cuban jazz group heard around the city.
That's this month on Detroit Jazz Stage. Gentlemen, we'd like to welcome you to our table at Detroit Jazz Stage. Thank you so much for stopping down.
Thank you for having us.
Mucho gusto.
Paul, maybe one thing you could tell us is how did the idea for Tumbao Bravo come about?
Well, what happened was I was playing with a group down in Ann Arbor at the Firefly Club called Los Gatos, and Alberto was also playing, I believe, that night, or at least sitting in. And we enjoyed playing with each other so much that Alberto approached me and said, hey, we should start a group. So it was like, hey, twist my arm, So that's how it all really got started from the very beginning.
How did you assemble the musicians that you used on your albums?
Well, what we did was we tried to figure out, okay, who would I like to have on piano? I think that was one of the things we started with.
Yes.
And then we chose, I suggested Sven Anderson. And then Sven suggested John Barron on bass.
Right.
And then Alberto.
Yeah, I suggested Javier Barrios, who had also played with John. And we actually talked about the instrumentation a little bit. And as luck would have it, I had played with Sven in another group that we had called Cubop back in the late 80s. So I was already familiar with Sven's wonderful technique and ideas. So it was a great thing to do.
Now, when you call this a Cuban jazz group, is that distinctive from, say, a Latin jazz group, or?
Yeah, because I think a lot of times when you say Latin, it sort of, it expands. You're talking about a lot of different things. When we say Cuban jazz, we really rely mostly on Cuban rhythms. We rely on the rhythms of the danzón, the cha-cha-cha, the mambo, the son. We even play guaguancó, on one tune. We play comparsa, which is carnival rhythms. So we use all those things, and then we play 6/8. And in fact, on our new CD, we even feature batas, which are ceremonial drums, in a very African feel to the music. So when we say Cuban jazz, that's what I mean, is that we rely on those rhythms.
And on the material that the group was going to play, did you agree up front what tunes or what music you would play and wouldn't play, or?
Well, what happened was when we assembled the core of the group with the musicians we just mentioned, we got together and had rehearsals at Alberto's house. And so we had a few tunes already in the can, some Paquito de Rivera, Mongo Santa Maria. I had some tunes that I had written. And then Sven brought in some songs he had written. And then John brought in some songs that he had written. So we started realizing that this was like a composer's workshop here. It was becoming a band that had its own music right from the beginning.
So, I'm sorry. Are you guys composing then mainly? You're composing outside the group and then bringing it in, or do you compose as a group ever?
We do both. Some of us come with actually written out charts, but we're always open to each other for changing those different parts. Like we ask for suggestions on rhythms. Sven is like our harmonic master. Right. He might change the chords. So a lot of these songs are group efforts.
Your latest album, when was that released?
Just about a week ago.
Okay, so this is new to all our listeners. There's a song that many people will hear for the first time here called Cumbia del Cuta. Did I say that correctly?
Del Cura.
Cura. Okay, what's that mean?
The cumbia, of course, is the rhythm at the beginning of the song and at the end of the song. In the middle, it actually goes into a son, which is Afro-Cuban.
I really like the break on that. I thought it was more like a mambo, but I'm not familiar with my styles.
Yeah, it's a mambo, and that's El Cura is the priest, and I named that after Mark Terrace because that's his nickname in Cuba, El Cura. They called him that because he was, he wore his cross and he had his Bible, and so they nicknamed him, So I guess when you're in Cuba and they nickname you, you're in.
Everybody's got a nickname in Cuba.
Yeah.
If our listeners were listening to this piece, what would you like them to get out of this? Is there anything?
Oh, just the contrast in styles of music that, the beginning is a little bit somber and a little bit like of a yearning, and then you have this mambo section, which is joyful and happy and danceable. And that's what I want them to hear out of it.
Well, you wrote it, so why don't we take a listen to it?
All right.
The fact that everybody was already writing music in a Latin or Cuban vein suggests that there's a strong undercurrent of Latin music that's played around Detroit. Alberto, maybe you can tell us how far back does the Latin tradition, music tradition go in Detroit?
Well, I do know that in the 70s there was a group, Jimmy Stephenson had, and he played in Detroit regularly. And there was a lot of other little groups. You know, the thing is that in Detroit, back in that era, there wasn't a lot of Cubans. There were some Puerto Ricans and a lot of Mexicans. So the style of music that's from Mexico was very different than what's in Cuba. It was mostly northern Mexican music, Tejano music, you know, that kind of stuff. But there were also small groups of Puerto Rican musicians around, including Ozzy Rivera and his group, that were, you know, out there fighting to do their thing. So, but there wasn't a lot of groups. There were maybe one or two or three at most. There wasn't that many. But I remember Jimmy Stephenson, La Combinación, and I remember Fito, the piano player, and his cousin Nenge playing with their group. But that was it. We basically took some of Paul's tunes that weren't Latin per se, and sort of, you know, added the rhythm section to it and just changed the feel of them so that it would be Cuban jazz. But that being said, I think everyone that was part of this core group had a very strong interest and an affinity for Cuban music.
No, that seems to be something that's always been strong in jazz, at least going back to the late 1940s when Dizzy Gillespie, you know, started getting his bands together, and he had Chano Pozo, you know, in the band, and really began writing music in that vein. And it seems to have struck a chord, so to speak, in the jazz community. And you know, we find that musicians would take tunes such as you described and Latinize them, you know, like T for Two or various other things.
Yeah, you know, one thing that's interesting is over the years I've sat in with a lot of groups, and you know, here I am with my congas, and there's a jazz group around me, and they say, "Hey, let's do something Latin." Well, you know, when you say that, that could be anything. It could be a samba, a bossa nova, guarapa. It could be, you know, a Mexican or a Haitian or a Brazilian or a Cuban rhythm. Mm-hmm. So the number of rhythms and styles is vast. And so a lot of times some of the jazz musicians would say, let's do something Latin. And for them, that meant just something that sounds exotic. They didn't know the exact names of the rhythms or anything like that. So it's been an educational process with these guys, because they've had to learn the difference between a cha-cha-cha, the instrumentation for a cha-cha-cha. Paul plays clave and guido now, you know.
Wonderful.
and he's playing well, you know. And so it's really great.
When you put the band together, did you ever think of expanding it? I mean, did you know, if you had a wish list of a band to play Cuban jazz, I mean, did you start off with 8 pieces and then the financial reality set in or something, and trying to get gigs for an 8-piece band, and you slimmed it down, or? No,
I mean, first of all, I think that we work well as a quintet. We work well as a sextet. We work well as a septet. Mm-hmm. You know, we sometimes think, God, it would be nice to have a person playing the tres, which is the guitar. That's played in Cuba. It would be great to have a trombone. We sometimes talk about this, and you know, I don't think that's out of question for the future. You know, of course, some of that has to do with the economics. You know, the bigger a band is, the less likely you are to get gigs that pay enough for people to continue to be doing those gigs. Yeah. So, you know, as a general rule, we play as a quintet. We sometimes play as a sextet, and occasionally as a septet. I love playing as a septet, though, because I think that's when we get the full sound of all the 3 percussion instruments, you know, the bongo, the congas, and the timbales together, locking, you know, along with the trumpet and saxophone, and it's great.
Who does the arrangements when you play as a septet? Do you have stuff written out, or is it... How does that work when you put a tune together? I guess that's leads into that question. Is it someone brings in some music and you figure out how many percussion instruments you want to use, or? Well,
you know, I think pretty much all the tunes can be played with 2 or 3 percussionists. Uh-huh. All of them. And as a general rule, it's Javier on timbales, myself and congas. And, you know, that's sort of how most of the tunes are. As far as figuring out the rhythm, You know, we sit down together, we listen to the music, and what fits, and then we put the percussion down.
And how has the group changed from the beginning till now?
Well, I would say when we first started off, it was a quintet. And then, of course, we started thinking, okay, now we would like to have a trumpet sound in here because that is such a part of the Cuban music. So we agreed that two people that we liked their playing the most was Paul Finkbeiner and then later Bob Mojica. So now, these days, we're playing mostly with Bob Mojica, and he has just added such a wonderful element with his tone, his expertise with just music in general. He's a real gentleman. He's very supportive. He's just a great guy. So he just fit into the band like a glove. So we just have very high regard for Bob Mojica on the trumpet. So I would say that was how it changed, adding the trumpet. And then, of course, for some gigs, like this Saturday at the Concert of Colors, we're going to have Cano Quiles on bongo. So that sort of completes the sound, I think, that we're really looking for.
Paul, is Montuno Salad, is that a tune that you wrote before the group got together, or?
Yes, that is a tune that I wrote before the Tumbao Bravo was together. I wrote that for my album Parisian Protocol with Gary Shunk on the piano. And that's a tune that I think I just put together because the way I write tunes is I sit down and I'm practicing my flute, and I'll come across a phrase or something, and I'll just work with it, and then I'll say, okay, it needs a bridge, so then I'll kind of consciously work on the bridge part of it, and then we recorded it for the Parisian Protocol album, and I guess I would maybe describe it as a funky son or something. It had a real neat feel to it. And then when I brought it to that was one of the tunes that I brought from the very beginning to Tumbao to play as one of our tunes, and we made it into more specifically, what would you say, Alberto, a mambo?
Yeah, it's like a mambo.
Yeah, it's more of a real mambo sound. So yeah, so that became the title cut for our CD because, of course, many of the montuno is a piano pattern that's found in Cuban music, and of course we were doing lots of different variations on the montuno, so it seemed appropriate for the album Montuno Salad.
One of my favorite things about the track is your trumpet player, Ann Arbor's Paul Finkbeiner, and he actually appeared for our listeners on our Keller Christmas show, on the Port show, which was our January show, and also on our featurette that featured one of pianist Dave Cook's songs, and that's actually his own group, but he plays a great solo on this as well. How did you come across him?
Well, Paul Finkbeiner has played with me for years. He was on my Swing As You Are album, and he's just, if you want an Ann Arbor trumpet player, you call Paul Finkbeiner. He's a wonderful player, great tone, great range, so it just seemed to be a natural guy to call at the time, and he did a terrific job, of course.
You're listening to Detroit Jazz Stage.
So is your music more accepted among the Latino community, among the jazz community, or a mixture, or where are they coming from?
You know, it's interesting. I think a lot of people, of all types are listening to us. We have a lot of, Latinos, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Dominicans, Cubans that show up to our gigs to watch us. And then we have a lot of the, American or the African-American folks that show up also, and they enjoy what we play. And they, yesterday it was really beautiful because we played at the Firefly, and there was a huge crowd, and it was as multicultural as you could have. There was, Asian people, there was African-Americans, there were Latin Americans, and, of course, a lot of Ann Arbor Americans.
Great.
Ann Arbor Americans.
Yeah. that's a specific category.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
I agree.
But, I remember the great drummer Roy Brooks once mentioning that one of his first gigs was in the 1950s. Well, not one of his first gigs, but a gig that he had for some time with a percussionist and vocalist named Cuban Pete.
Yeah.
Who worked at a club on Gratiot called the Haji Baba. And there were all these jazz guys there, and Brooks said that he picked up a lot of his feeling for Cuban music and Latin music in general from working with Cuban Pete. And the way he put it was that he was learning how to speak another language. And I thought that was so cool because the question which Rodney asked about, can Anglo musicians assimilate enough of the cultural weight of the Latin or Cuban musics to speak it fluently, and maybe it's a case where you speak it but you just have an accent.
Yeah,
you learn it's like another language.
Yeah, what happens is these are these are semantics in some ways because we are branches of the same tree basically. The tree that has its roots in Africa and Europe, like Spain and Portugal. When those two cultures came together, what happened is it expressed itself in different ways in different countries of the new world in the Americas. So, in Brazil you have Portuguese and African, but from specific parts of Africa where those people that were enslaved were brought. Cuba has Spanish and African, especially like the Bantu people of Africa, and of course if you go to New Orleans, which is not that far from Cuba, it also took a different expression. So it's almost like, instead of learning a totally different language, like the difference between Spanish and Russian, it would be more like Spanish and Italian or Portuguese. They're very similar. A lot of words are the same, and the grammar is the same. So a jazz musician that really knows jazz would naturally feel an affinity for Cuban music, and vice versa. I believe that.
Speaking of different cultures and that, where did you grow up?
I grew up in Oaxaca, in Mexico, in the southern part of Mexico, which, by the way, has a lot of, sort of Cuban-derived rhythms.
And that's where you started. Were you always a percussionist? Was that your first instrument, or
only instrument?
Your only instrument. When you say percussionist, what did you actually start playing when you were? And you did this when you were a child?
Yeah, the table. Yeah,
we've all played that.
yeah. But I played it for real though. I had a goal in mind,
And then you got what other instrument? You moved from a table to.
Well, I learned to play the conga, and then bongo, and then I got really into the bongo because that was a really exotic instrument, and I happened to learn from Armando Peraza, great bongocero, and I've gone to Cuba many times and learned from some of the very best people there that I could learn from, and I've been very, very lucky.
Yeah, the great thing about the bongo is that the other musicians don't set their things on top of it. I could see that being annoying.
Was saxophone your first instrument, Paul?
Yeah, well, I started on the piano at 8 years old, took piano lessons for about almost a year, and then we moved, and my parents sold the piano. I was disappointed about that. After that point, I just sort of got into sports and didn't get back into the music until college, when I came to Ann Arbor, and I noticed that everybody was just playing music everywhere you went, and I just got caught up into it. I was living in a house in Ann Arbor, and everybody was playing instruments, and one night I came home from work, and there was a woman sitting in front of my house in the back of a pickup truck playing flute with her boyfriend accompanying her on guitar. And I just realized how mesmerized I was about this flute sound. So, I just thought, okay, I think I'm going to try that. So she gave me the flute, and I blew notes out of it right away. And I thought, well, geez, maybe I can play music too. So that was my first real instrument, was flute. And from there, I went to clarinet and then the saxophone.
Is the Ann Arbor scene as fruitful musically as it was back when you got there?
I think it is. Yeah, there's just... Ever since I've been in Ann Arbor, since maybe 71, I came to go to U of M. I was a psychology major. And it's just exploding with music. There's just bands all over the place, all different styles, people from all over the world. There's people coming there. There's new people in town all the time. So it's just a vibrant music scene, and always has been, ever from my own personal experience.
Nice.
Who influenced you when you started playing flute? What type of music were you listening to?
Well, I got immediately into listening to jazz, and one of my very first influences was Yusef Lateef and Herbie Mann on the flute, and then Dexter Gordon and Charlie Parker, John Coltrane. So I just immediately got into jazz because I couldn't read music. I played everything by ear. I memorized everything, and then later got into reading music. But one of the first bands I ever played with was at the university dance department, playing with a drum troupe where I would play flute on top of conga drums and timbales and percussion. So right from the very beginning, I was playing Afro-Cuban rhythms, especially the Igbo and the Wawanko.
So if there was a sax player that you would be most influenced by, would that be who that?
That would probably be Dexter Gordon and Yusef Lateef. Yusef Lateef, a Detroit musician,
sure.
Of course.
Yep, that's right.
On EP, we see that's composed by Sven, and this is one of the pieces that he brought to the group when you put it together, or?
Yeah, he actually wrote it as a tribute to Eddie Palmieri. That's what their initials are, EP. Eddie Palmieri, and it starts with a piano intro,
which is amazing.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. And I wanted him to do it longer, for like 4 or 5 minutes.
Right.
And actually yesterday he played it that way, which was really nice. It was a very long interlude. And he wasn't sure how to do the tune. He just knew that it was 6/8 because that's how it felt. And so we did it as a 6/8, and I introduced the bata drums, which are these hourglass shaped drums that are played as 3 drums. They're played ceremonially in Cuba and all over the world. And it was congas, batas, Javier and timbales, and shekere, a shaker. And it just fit very beautifully.
Paul, where could our listeners contact you or find out more about you?
Well, we've got a website that's easy to remember, www.tumbaobravo.com.
And we'll have a link on our website as well at jazzstage.us.
Great. Oh, and then I should mention that, of course, you can purchase our CD by going to the website. It's very easy. It's all set up. It tells you exactly what to do. TumbaoBravo.com.
Yeah,
So
you can also go to cdbaby.com. You can go to Descarga.com out of New York.
PKORecords.com.
PKO Records, yes, absolutely.
And both of your CDs will be available there, correct?
Yes.
I was going to ask about the song Groove Chick, which was another Sven Anderson composition. Again, where you featured Finkbeiner on trumpet. And this is one where we get to hear you playing your flute.
Yeah, I love this tune, probably mostly because of the bass line that Sven wrote for it. It's got a real distinct feel to it. And also on this tune, I play the piccolo for the first time in any of my recordings, which I've added to my playing in the last 3-4 years. And it just fits so perfectly for Cuban music, because originally in Cuban music they would play the charanga, which is a wooden flute. I haven't put my hands on one yet, but it has a sound similar to the flute, and the piccolo goes up very high. So I just really enjoyed playing the piccolo these days. I got a one that has a wood body with the silver hardware on it for the keys, and it has a real mellow, woody sound. I'm sort of trying to sound like a charanga.
Paul, what are your plans for the future?
We'd like to keep recording and composing new music. I think it keeps the band focused, and I think that's how a band can grow as individual musicians and as a group. And we would also like to get into these festivals, jazz festivals, Latin music festivals. It's a real challenge as a band, the band business manager to get into these festivals, but it's almost like you have to really know somebody on the inside, but you have to just keep trying, putting it out there, and who knows what can happen. The right person gets to hear it, and you're in. So now, if listeners out there are listening and want to know where we're playing, you can go directly to our website, www.tumbaubravo.com, and we have our calendar up and running, so you can check us out, come hear us play, buy our CDs, enjoy our music.
On your album, the latest album, Clavier and the Doctor, is a wonderful piece written by Sven again, and it has this kind of like Eddie Harris kind of party kind of vibe going on. And could you tell us a little bit about that piece?
Yeah, that's based on the Cha-Cha-Cha. And I think when Sven originally wrote the tune, he kind of was thinking of a swing feel. But this is one of those things where we sort of made it work for a Cuban sound. And it's got a real element of blues to it. And it does have I like that analogy. It's got a kind of a party feel. You just want to
like Puncho Sanchez.
Start dancing, And whenever we play that tune, everybody starts dancing in their seats or wherever they're standing. So that's a good analogy. It is a party feel, a cha-cha-cha, kind of a funky cha-cha-cha, feel.
Right.
Paul and Alberto, on behalf of Detroit Jazz Stage, we'd like to thank you for dropping by our table here and spending a few minutes with us and allowing us and our listeners to hear all your fine music. So, on behalf of myself and Rodney Reeves, thanks very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate coming in.
Thanks for the invite.
The Detroit International Jazz Festival, Labor Day weekend. For locals, it's a sweet end of summer ritual. For jazz fans everywhere, it's a world-class party on the riverfront. The 2006 Detroit Jazz Fest will feature 100 bands on 6 stages, including Diane Shore with the Wayne State University Jazz Big Band, Sergio Mendes in Brazil 2006, Ahmad Jamal, Oscar Castro Neves, Taj Mahal, Dr. John, Joan Osborne, the Gerald Wilson Big Band, plus more, including many of the artists featured on Detroit JazzStage. Please visit DetroitJazzFest.com for a complete schedule and visit Detroit on Labor Day weekend, September 1st through 4th, 2006. You can find a link to DetroitJazzFest.com at jazzstage.us.
You've been listening to Detroit Jazz Stage. Our guests were Alberto Nacif and Paul Vornhagen from the Cuban jazz band Tumbao Bravo.
Detroit Jazz Stage is produced at Longview Sound in Metro Detroit for JazzStage Productions. Mark Byerly is our producer and sound engineer. Dean Sahutsky is the executive producer. Your hosts are Rodney Reeves and Jim Gellert.